says you're on the show. Everyone can see and hear you. Something we're live. Okay.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our CUGC Ask Me Anything. Today we are taking all of your questions about hybrid work and work from anywhere. I know that's the big topic of conversation these days, and I have an awesome panel of experts here to answer all your questions. So just really briefly, I'm going to do a quick introduction, then I'm going to let these guys come on and say more about themselves. So leading us fearlessly in our discussion is Shane Kleinert. He is a CTP and a South Florida CUGC leader.
Happy to be here again. Saying we're a year and a half, I think, later than the original AMA we did around this topic. So it'd be cool to talk through the differences and stuff that we all see.
Yeah. I also have, I'm just going to go in order of my screen. Rich Severson, he is with Stratodesk. Hello, Rich.
Good morning, everybody. Well, good afternoon now. Being in Nashville, you guys are an hour ahead of me. So yeah, good afternoon, everybody.
And from Liquidware, we have Jason E. Smith. He's a frequent flyer on our CUGC webinars. Hi, Jason.
Hey, thanks for having us, and we're still pleasantly pleased to be one of the a founding member, sponsor of the CUGC. So happy how CUGC has worked out over the last several years.
And last but not least, from Goliath, we have Thomas Charlton. Hello, Thomas. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Stephanie. Hi, everyone.
All right. Well, I'm going to disappear. I'm still going to be here, but I'll be behind the scenes, and I'm going to let Shane kick us off. And, if you guys have more you want to say about yourselves and your companies and what you guys do, love to hear it. So I'll be back later.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks so much, Stephanie. So, yeah, it's good to be here. Thank you, everyone, for joining for another AMA. Really excited for today's conversation. This is interactive, right? This is live, no slides. We threw all those out. Really want to talk, get into the tech, talk about, future state, talk about your current scenarios that you all are running in. Maybe you have specific topics that you want to talk about around, work from home, flexible work. Maybe there's a current challenge that you have and whatnot. And you want to just ask. We've got some great folks here on the call. So, yeah, interactive. Just go ahead in the little comment section. You can just, go ahead and post. If you wanted to start off, why don't you post where you're from and where you're dialing in from? That'd be kind of cool to see where everyone's at and whatnot. So with that said, we'd like to kind of kick it off. I guess just if you just pop around the horn here, I guess, with Rich and team, and just kind of a little bit about yourself and what you do at your company. Maybe a quick 30 seconds or so, and then how has your life personally changed in the company over the last year and a half with being hybrid / flexible kind of work that we were all kind of forced into, even though we've been technically as EUC been doing this for like 15 plus years, right? So yeah, I guess Rich, we'll kick off with you, man.
Yeah, well, again, thank you, Jason. A pleasure to be doing this, and you don't date us too much. I mean, yeah, some of us have been doing this for a long time, and so I'm Rich Severson, the VP of Solutions Engineering at Stratodesk, and obviously we're one of the companies that builds the software, No Touch OS, that's designed for repurposing PCs, thin clients, those kinds of things. I like to tell people, it's kind of it's a high performance Linux OS that allows you to deliver VDI and SaaS-based applications out to your end users. That, by the way, comes with a fantastic enterprise management solution. And I think personally, I've been a work from home user since 1994 was the last time I actually had to go to an office every day. So it's been quite a while for me. So my work life hasn't changed that much, with the exception of, with the pandemic starting out, it was a mad race to get everybody to work from home. This year was kind of been the work from home better kind of thing. And I think the biggest change, if you will, has been the introduction of all the different collaboration tools and optimization pieces and all of those kinds of things that, I'm sure Jason and Thomas will get into about how we monitor and manage and maintain those kinds of things. So I think that's been the biggest change over this year, is how to take those collaboration tools and VDI and deliver it better, rather than just saying, hey, I can now connect via VPN and see my files. So I think that's been the biggest change.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that's super well said. I think a lot of folks realize, I know us personally as working for as Choice Switch, we're a consulting organization, right? So, we in the same scenario is like, we've been doing remote desktop technology, EUC, for 20 plus years, right? And so we've been preaching that. But it's like when these companies came in and they had to send that workforce from home. New hardware orders came in, new licensing purchases, and it was just a ton of effort put in just getting people. Let's just get folks going, right? And there wasn't a lot of effort put on like user experience. So like you said, really focused around user experience. So it'd be nice to hear kind of both Thomas and Jason work for companies that are focused around back end infrastructure as well as user experience, right? And so Jason, if you want to kind of talk through a little bit about Liquidware and how you guys maybe have transitioned a little bit as well, through the experience.
Sure. It was interesting to watch the picture unfold. I was actually presenting at a CUGC in Birmingham last year when a lot of the shutdowns were starting to occur in the first week of March. I think it was March 12th, so second week. And I can't remember what the topic was planned for CUGC, but there was about 30 people that showed up, and it was a cross section of the industries in the Birmingham area, a lot of healthcare in that room and manufacturing. And we just changed the subject on the fly and said, and it became immediately about what are we going to do about, as an industry, about shutdowns and the problems at hand. So many of the IT people in the room were saying they had to send people home by the end of the week. They had to figure out a work from home strategy even that week. So a lot of them were Citrix customers, obviously being at the CUGC. So they immediately were looking to cloud. And so we saw the cloud take off during that time frame. And we saw a lot of people do everything or anything that it took to keep people productive during the middle of last year, from that time March to the middle of last year, until they got into some kind of groove to where organizations could work smoothly from home. But then we predicted, and we've rightfully seen this year, a lot of those organizations circle back and say, okay, we got through. Now, how can we make it better? Because there was a little breather room in there that we had all survived, or many of the organizations did survive. And how could we do this better to make sure users were productive, to make sure they had agile, flexible desktops to be able to flow between one or the other, and also know the user experience. Are they experiencing a great desktop at home the same way that they would have in the office? And as for Liquidware and our part, we were already in the adaptive workspace management area, is what we called ourselves, and we've evolved this to digital workspace management. But we built our company on helping organizations adapt as they transform from one desktop to the next. So a lot of our customers were prepared, and they could send workers from home. On Monday morning, report in and make sure you install the Citrix receiver if this was the case, and you'll be okay. But we still had to make sure they had enough licenses and trued up. But it was the same way with the VMware markets, and we saw a pop in the Amazon Workspaces markets and all the way across. So we were able to help them transition, whether it was their user profiles, their persona flowing into the next desktop, even cross operating system, or their Flex app layering coming in, or to sign up for those services if they didn't already. And then we were ensuring that user experience along the way, or helping to tell them what that was with Stratosphere. And so we've seen projects actually grow this year, and the industry explode, because I think we were all looking at these remote desktops. A lot of industries were looking at these remote desktops as a specific way one department may have been doing their desktop management. And then it became everyone needs to be able to do this on the fly. And that's where we saw a lot of growth with organizations expanding. So a lot of customers expanded licenses, and then there was a lot of net new.
Yeah, and then that makes perfect sense. And I think with the expansion of licensing, obviously comes the expansion of potentially hardware, or bursting out into cloud resource locations, as you had mentioned. So how does Thomas, from your side of things, how does Goliath tackle that, I guess, on the back end, for handling environments that are hybrid, right? That may potentially have moved to cloud, to public cloud, either AWS, Google, or Amazon, or Azure, as well as on-premises infrastructure. And how have you guys transitioned? Has any software in your stack transitioned or been updated to support maybe some of these new use cases?
Well, I think we saw a lot of what Jason talked about it when it was first work from home. There was this mad scramble, mostly by the IT departments, to be able to make sure that everybody could actually work, right? So that was the first 6 months of the pandemic. And then after that, we saw layered in management requests that were focused on, well, can they work from home? Can they be productive? And are they actually working from home? We also, Jason brought up a good point about people moving to the cloud. We've seen that a tremendous amount. And so we've responded in a number of ways. We're able to bring out new technology to help IT departments identify if somebody was having an end user experience issue, and then additional telemetry to be able to help troubleshoot home office issues, right? So that was a huge thing throughout 2020. And then also in the tail end of 2021, when management started asking about end users and can they work and are they working, what applications are they accessing, we brought out a whole host of new reports, scorecards to give an objective measurement of end user experience, and as well as end user productivity reports, which would give management some insight and department heads insight into who was working with what. And then early this year, we brought out our Goliath multi-cloud monitor product, because we're finding that people are common is EC2 with AWS EC2, and then they have workloads over in Azure. They have Office 365 and things like that. And I know years ago they were talking about everything's going to move to the cloud overnight. I think what we're seeing is there's going to remain. Internal clouds didn't stand still waiting for public clouds to take over all of those vendors. Sure. So there are internal clouds. There'll be multi-clouds, right? People using AWS. So I think people are going to pick the right tool for the job when it comes to platforms. So we responded with new products, new reporting, new telemetry to help solve these issues. So.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. So, and that's actually some of that's new for me too. Thomas, I know we had caught up back in the day at Jarian Gibson and myself. I think it was 2014. We did a tech bake-off of all the different monitoring solutions, and both Liquidware and Goliath, I'm happy to say, are still standing today, and you guys are doing really, really great. So some of those other companies are no longer here, but it's interesting to see what you're saying there about the scorecards. And the productivity reports. I'm seeing a lot of monitoring companies shift towards that as well. How are you guys battling, or how are you not battling, but how are you seeing like the requests come in from, because you have, everyone has different management styles, right? There's user experience and then there's the management styles. And especially for the ones that were forced into it, they're looking at it as like, what's my user doing at home? What are they doing? Are they walking the dog? Are they playing with the kids? How much work is actually getting done versus managing output, right? They're looking at time versus output. But with that said, that drives what they're asking for in these reports. So like, how do you handle the, Big Brother and some of those things? Are you actually looking at, what they're actually doing on the screen? Or you like, maybe you could talk through a little bit, like each of you, maybe different flavor and how you handle the kind of those requests coming in. I'd be interested to hear that.
So, I'd be really curious to know too. I mean, those of us that have been working from home for years have realized that, just because we're working from home doesn't mean, we're off, doing whatever things we do at home and not doing our job. I mean, personally, I find that I tend to work more than most people that are in the office, right? And so I would like to see some of those reports that says, at first people were trying to sort out how to work from home, because they didn't have the equipment or the IT staff, as you mentioned, they had the capacity from a inside infrastructure to be able to support, 300 users or 3,000 users. And now suddenly they're having to support 3,000 or 20,000, so how did that capacity do that? And now that everybody's used to working from home and we've given them the tools, whether it's thin clients or repurposed PCs or USB sticks or whatever, now they're actually working from home. Has productivity actually increased because those people now, not that they're being monitored more often or more regularly or diligently, but, it's just once you get into the workflow, you realize you're sitting at your desk 10 hours a day because you're not out at the water cooler or going out and having lunch with people. So I'd be curious to see some of those real, what are the productivity increases over the last year and a half?
Yeah, we added productivity reports at the request of our customers last spring in Stratosphere. But we refused to get into the net nanny type mentality of getting down to the very granular things that users are doing. Now you can use our solution to to check and dig really deep if you really want to do that. But the reports, the pre-canned reports that we prepared for customers, and that's what they use most of the time, tells them general things like applications that are in use, which ones are in the forefront, and you can come up with a scoring for your own organization because those apps are not always the same. And you can identify 4 or 5 apps, say how often are they in these 4 or 5 apps, and the one that really throws you off though is how often is that browser in the forefront, because unless you're looking at the URL for salesforce.com or whatever they're supposed to be doing, you don't know whether they have salesforce.com open or Facebook. So we can get down to the URL level, but in our pre-canned reports, we just encourage organizations to look at the bigger picture to see if their users are productive and look at the apps that they have open and the time that desktop is actually active and logged in versus not logged in at all. So that's a really big flag, right? They didn't even log into their virtual desktop, and that's their official desktop. But then the apps that are in the foreground and the percentage of time, and we can give a user productivity score that is agreed with the customer with Stratosphere by doing that.
What's interesting with that too is like now you have this data, right? You can also start drawing from that and say, okay, well, how often, like what's the different work styles? Like how often do they switch between applications, right? How often are they, I don't know if you're getting granular, like are copy and pasting between applications, but at minimum, you're at least seeing the four active windows, right? Do they shift around a lot? And if so, then you could also have, potentially have conversations with the team. If you see maybe one person works this way, other people are working like this, but this person's more productive. Hey, seeing your, extreme productivity was, the way you work, you mind sharing that with the team or whatnot, right? So it's definitely some interesting data you can get from that for sure.
Well, it's also, Shane, interpreted differently by different people.
Yes.
So we have one end user productivity report. Now, with a monitoring product focused on end user experience, we never have dealt with human resources before.
Right.
But we take this one piece of data, and it's used differently by different people. Our IT folks have literally no interest in trying to report on who's working and who's not. Zero interest, right? So, but they run the report because somebody asked them to run the report, right? But what they're able to do is take that report and say, wait a second, this person hasn't been logging on, and be proactive and say, hey, have you been having problems with your home office? So they're using it to be more proactive.
That's great. Yeah.
HR is not looking and wondering if people are working. They're trying to understand patterns in homework behavior so that when people because a lot of people think we'll still remain hybrid. So how can we change from a human resources perspective our approach to work life balance to be able to maximize people's productivity and their satisfaction with the job? And then their managers, and it really depends on the personality. It doesn't, some managers want to really check and make sure everybody's working, right? And hopefully we don't report to people like that. Or other managers really just want to make sure that their people are, interesting data points about accessing applications. Is Citrix working? So, more informational related. But it's really interesting how one report can be interpreted by different people that have different interests in really the same data, and to help them do their jobs better,
I'd agree with that. The one thing that plays into this, though, is I'm sure that most of the panel here has read about the Great Resignation, people resigning their jobs for a variety of different reasons, right? And if organizations get too strict about seeing what I'm doing in every 24 hours a day, you're not going to put up with that, and you're going to quit. So in this time where everybody internally here, I'm reaching out to my coworkers and checking their user satisfaction with their job, weekly now, and talking to them and seeing if there's anything differently, because we want to hold on to those employees. It's much more difficult to go out there and hire for someone like that. So those companies that really are cracking down and looking at user productivity on a very granular basis will not stand to benefit on the HR level here under the current environment.
I forget who it was. I was talking to one customer that they said that they have a requirement that their employees be on camera, and it just made me shudder. I can't even imagine being in that kind of a work environment. To your point, Jason, I'd be like, I'm out. Sorry.
Yeah, I'd be like, my requirement is everyone has to stand up during the meeting too, and see how many people are wearing pants or not, right? Yeah, that's Mickey Mouse. Everyone manages things differently, but yeah, that's honestly what shifted, in my opinion. Like that Great Resignation that you speak about was really that everyone was in this grind, this 9 to 5, 9 to 7, 9 to 10, whatever it is, grind of just constantly, nose to the grindstone and doing their thing and not able to step back out. And this gave everyone an opportunity to take a step at what they're doing, experience more time with the family, with their friends, and realize like, whoa, I can actually do something. And then now that they can work remote, now all these other jobs opened up, and different pay and different more flexibility. So yeah, it's definitely shifted a lot. So yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting time for sure. And I think that gets back into, you want to make sure your employees are taken care of and happy. And honestly, sometimes it's just so people realize that they're ready for a different experience. Maybe it's nothing to do with, them being happy or not, right? And it's just about meaning like they're not happy. Maybe they're happy where they are, but they just want to try something different. So that's definitely interesting. And so the report, it's good to have the reports, it's just use them in the right way for sure. I think is a kind of a good closing comment on that. So we did have a question come in around security, right? It was really just kind of want to understand kind of the latest and greatest security features for remote workers. So I guess if we can kind of talk, I guess we'll go with Rich first. You're kind of obviously on the endpoint side of things and kind of locking down those endpoints and provisioning those endpoints, both hardware, more software based, but maybe you can talk to some of the security features that maybe you had to build into the product or that are there to help with these kind of flexible scenarios. And then I guess Thomas and Jason, you guys can chime in on from a monitoring perspective, what have you guys doing there from a security standpoint, alerting and that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, well, thank you. And in regards to security, I mean, the cool thing for us is No Touch OS has been a secure product to begin with, right? So it's about keeping the No Touch OS and the No Touch Center Management Platform, keeping those up to date. But now that you've got all these people pushed out, right? The things that I see regarding security is, one is how do we update those devices, right? And we were fortunate enough to have introduced what we call Cloud Extension at the beginning of last year, which basically gives me as the administrator the same level of control of those endpoint devices, whether they're natted at work from home or if they're in the office. So in fact, actually, we had one organization that said, they had to move 3,000 employees in 2 or 3 days, like Jason was saying. And they said, had it not been for Stratodesk with Cloud Extension, they'd be able to just change the URL and say, hey, pick up your device, take it home. And the executive staff said, well, okay, if they take it home, but how are we going to reconfigure it to connect to NetScaler outside versus NetScaler or Storefront inside? And the IT staff said, look, we don't care. As long as it connects to No Touch Center, we can reconfigure it on the fly. We don't care. As long as it reports in, we can then update it. So when there are updates to Workspace app or security updates or maybe a change in workflow, instead of accessing, an application via Workspace app, they're now connecting via browser. Or, the other thing that we've seen a lot of is the integrations of the collaboration tools and telephony, requests of, hey, can you help us out? Can you do Avaya? Can you, how do we include the optimization packs for Teams, for Zoom, those kinds of things, to where, it's not necessarily just part of the VDI. You've got to get it out to the endpoint as well, right? So to be able to get those components out there over a secure manner and delivered across, the organization. But also, the other thing that I'm seeing is more and more people are moving away from VPNs, but then there's still those companies that are using VPNs. And one of the things that I point out to them, because like I was actually on a call with a customer this morning, and they said, well, we're going to have our users using VPN. And I said, well, that's great, but I'm going to venture to guess that probably 80% of your support cases are my VPN's not working. So if the VPN's not working, how are you going to help them? Right? And that's the advantage of the way that our management platform works, is regardless of whether it's connected to the corporate network, I can still reach out and manage that device. So I think those are the key aspects, is, being able to determine how they're going to connect. Are they connecting to a NetScaler or to a cloud service? Are they connecting via VPN? Being able to keep those devices up to date, so that you're getting those, and then being able to get all the new collaboration tools and features and functions out to the endpoints.
Awesome. I think that answer, answers kind of the question there. Is there any, I guess, if you had to call out like a security feature, you're like, hey, this is something that really can benefit. Maybe it's that No Touch OS, converting, so they still have the ability to have that, that at home computer that they typically use. Maybe it isn't sent out by the employee, and maybe it's, being able to kind of boot to that and then come back. I don't know. Is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not too familiar with the No Touch OS, but is that a complete wipe, or it can boot to it and then go back to the original state?
So you can actually do it either way, right? You can do a repurpose and replace, right? Or you can live boot via USB type device if that's what you want to do. So I think from our perspective, security perspective, we've already been secure, but I think where the introduction of new security has been, okay, now we as IT administrators are being asked by the business to make sure that our end users, now that they're work from home, how are they maintaining compliance? In other words, can we stop them from doing screen captures? Can we, monitor keystrokes, those kinds of things to make sure that there's not malware or keyboard loggers that are being injected into the device. Now, of course, we say, our OS is already secure. We prevent that. But we've actually had to have partnerships with things like CrowdStrike, where somebody said, look, we've got a CrowdStrike tenant where we need to have those endpoints connecting so we can monitor that to make sure, even though it's secure, we still have to have the analytics. So.
Awesome. No, I think that's great. You add that in. I think that definitely answers the question, some of the additional features and potential partnerships there to help with that. I guess, Jason and Thomas, so what's your thoughts there on kind of the security aspect and from a reporting standpoint?
While our monitoring can pick up on some of that, I'll focus my answer on our Profile Unity UEM and the security attributes.
Well, that's true too. Yeah, we're just talking monitoring, but yeah, you guys obviously, yeah.
Yeah, well, because Thomas can complement what my answer may have even been in that area too, but maybe focusing on that one. But our what we saw was organizations wanting to take a look at. Some of them had a deal where users could be in the office and work 3 days of the week. They still had they could work from home 2 days of the week, right? So then there was a whole compliance answer. So some of our finance and healthcare customers stepped forward and said, aren't there, it seems like I remember there's features in Profile Unity I could use to lock down desktops to a certain degree to keep them from running certain apps certain times a day or from a location and things like that. So we saw a lot more interest in those features that we had built in over the years, because we can set things at a HKLM level, a local machine level, that the standard user rights can't overwrite those. So whether it be, copy and paste, whether it be a screen capture, we can disable certain parts of the of Windows from occurring. Of course, there's ways around that, right? I can take my smartphone and take a picture of the screen, but still, you've made your best effort in some of those areas to make sure that those desktops are secure and locked down. And then the context awareness was something that started to come more and more into play, because we can contextually lock down or restrict an application from running. And I'm not just talking about our Flex app attachment where we're bringing that in. We can restrict that, but we can take the native apps that are installed on a laptop and we can say during this time of the day, this user can't run them. So maybe you sure don't want them running those in the middle of the night. Maybe if they're told don't work after hours, but you also don't know who might get access to that machine and try to log on. So they wanted to lock down those machines further. So we saw an added interest in features that we've had in the solution for many years that all of a sudden people wanted to start using for different use cases and different reasons.
Yeah, and I think the adaptive nature, because it's funny you mentioned, I was just thinking in the concept of monitoring because that's what we were talking about. But yeah, I mean, obviously you guys on the Profile Unity side of things, I mean, that's huge, right? With adaptive workspace from a security side. And have you seen so with the adaptive workspace piece and contextual awareness is awesome for handling those scenarios when they're home versus on Wi-Fi versus, in the office sort of thing, and kind of adapting the workspace. Do you guys, have you seen, I guess, a need for, because this was something that was thrown, and maybe now it's being tuned, but in the beginning it was kind of thrown together where people needed maybe admin rights or something like that, and you had to do privilege escalation temporarily till things got sorted. What other aspects of the product and I guess it's interesting from your perspective too, because you have the monitoring side. Did you see, I guess, in your scenario where you're using Stratosphere to kind of uncover a little bit of what's going on, get some of the data, and then quickly transition that into?
Yeah, oftentimes you'll see the a bottleneck occur with Stratosphere, and then you can correlate that and you can solve that and take action with Profile Unity by changing some of the attributes on the desktop preferences. Same as group policy preferences, but we enact those in a different and secure fashion. Overall, the way that we did that for some customers was that we'd come into the environment and see first what were they trying to do, what use case were they trying to solve, and it would be different from location to location and from customer to customer. For healthcare, it was one challenge. For accounting, it may be a slightly different challenge. But the one thing I wanted to go back that you asked about was elevation and privilege elevation. So there's a feature set in Profile Unity that can solve that use case. So if you pushed out an app that maybe you had published it before on a Citrix virtual app server, and you already had this solved for running these things as an admin, perhaps now you're running it locally and you've delivered it in a different way. And we can raise the privileges for one specific application by doing that, while keeping the user a standard user. Like, you want to make sure you keep them as a standard user. It's too easy to flip that switch, right, and make everybody an admin of their desktops. But that's a big no-no. It's one of the first things in a security compliance audit that you'll get your hand popped on. And so we can help solve that use case with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And because I feel like it was scramble to start, as Rich pointed out, right? And then that's that scenario where it's like, do you have the time to go troubleshoot that application, get Procmon going, figure out what permissions they have, or it's like, give them admin rights, get them in, we got to just get business going. And then you forget about it. You go on, and then, now you don't go back and take care of it. So it's nice to know you have that privilege escalation built into that piece. So I guess, Thomas, from your side, if you can kind of comment, I guess, on the monitoring side a little bit on how some of that data has helped, either you provide that data to the teams to lock down, or just, how has that helped?
So from a security perspective, we really coexist beside many security products. So Lakeside does a lot in terms of endpoint monitoring and management. And so we coexist. Typically, when there's some sort of a security issue, they consult our technology for more detailed analysis of particular users and sort of what their behavior has been, connecting through Citrix and things of that nature. So that's how we generally get brought into any sort of a security breach or concern.
Okay, no, that makes perfect sense. And we do. So I'm curious to, I guess, from you guys, we had another question that came in here, actually. And the question specifically was around, do you see a difference at all between enterprises and healthcare relative to challenges presented by remote workers? So that just had come in there.
Well, probably the biggest difference is, first of all, patient care, right? I mean, there's the angry CFO who can't get access to a particular report or is getting poor reception from home. And then there's the clinician who's trying to access a graphics intensive application at 2:00 in the morning, and they have a patient on the table, right? So there's a criticality difference between, I think, the two that amps up the concern when there are performance issues. At least that's what we've seen. And the second thing would be the real complexion, actually, of a IT organization and enterprise. And Jason and Rich, I don't know if you've seen this as well, but if you took a healthcare IT organization versus an enterprise organization, generally the healthcare organization, to support the same number of users, tends to have about half the budget and half the people of a similar enterprise. So they're constantly trying to do more with less, so and they tend to have a lot of IT generalists versus a lot of Citrix specialists. So, at least in healthcare for us, what we've done is develop a lot of embedded intelligence and automation that is automatically looking for events, conditions, failure points, for example, that can cause end user experience issues, and trying to bubble them up quickly so that somebody can isolate the root cause of a end user experience issue. But that's how we sort of look at the differences between the healthcare. Animals.
I'd agree with that. I'd agree with exactly what you said, Thomas, and that is that in healthcare we see that the desktop people will put use cases into certain boxes and say, I'm going to manage these users like this, and this is the type of terminal they're going to get, and this is the type of operating system, and these are the apps, right? And then the administrative staff are going to get this, and then the executives are going to get that. So there's at least 3 types of desktops. You can get and do a double click beyond that. But for enterprises, there's even more. You'll have a per department basis, and that's usually at least 7 departments that you're managing differently. So there's more use cases, and you do generally run into more resources with more admins on staff. So a little bit easier to spread the load.
And I think from our aspect, where we've seen the impact on that, because from an access standpoint, whether they're inside the infrastructure or whether they're work from home, to us it really doesn't matter. The key influencer, I guess, has been with the optimization tools, bringing that back in. Is that to your point, Jason, people used to have, the task user, I guess, if you will, in the healthcare or in the enterprise, where they would give them, this little thin client and say, hey, go take that, and do your job. Well, inside the office or in the enterprise, they weren't worried about collaboration tools. So now, you've got 1,500, 15,000 employees that picked that little device up and took it home. Now that little device doesn't have the horsepower because of all the increased capabilities of the collaboration tools. In fact, we're seeing, and I'm actually cautioning people now, where things like Citrix with the Teams optimization, Citrix actually now has a minimum hardware requirement at the endpoint, which is something that Citrix stayed away from for years. But now if you want to have Teams optimization with your, with your workspace app, there's a requirement that it's a 1.8 gigahertz CPU and a dual core, and et cetera. So now we're seeing those influences coming in. And then, of course, then you compound that with the chip shortage. It's making it, life difficult for a lot of people. And I think from our aspect, again, having the flexibility to go across any of the hardware really doesn't matter. We can do that. But where it's impacted us the most is we've had like a customer that, let's say that they've been using NUCs for their thin clients for years. And so now they go get a NUC. They bought it, let's say 500 NUCs in May of this year that had a brand new NVMe drive in it. So we've had to update the OS to include the driver to be able to support that, and then in August, they go buy another 200 because they've got to, again, increase their productivity and their seat count. So they go buy new NUCs in September and they're different NVMe drives again. So we're seeing that.
Yeah.
Same standpoint, I'm seeing a lot of people pulling things out of the closet that, they hadn't touched those machines in, 7 years, but
right.
They're, i3s, which is perfectly fine. Why not reuse those? So that's
Rich,
where we're seeing the impact.
Rich, I want to pick up on something that you said when you took these thin clients. You may have even sent thin clients home to support the work from home use case, or you're using Stratodesk and you're repurposing a PC. And we were working with you guys well before the pandemic to have a client on that would run on the Linux portion that would tell you the metrics from whatever that input point is, because it's a bit of a gaping hole. If you don't know user experience metrics on what we've deemed as the first mile, we used to call it the last mile, but it's really the first mile now that you've sent users home, then you're missing a key piece. So we had a lot of people asking us for those Wi-Fi metrics that we added. Approximately, we were even guessing and putting a guesstimate on how far you are away from your Wi-Fi access point. And we have those metrics now for Stratodesk and for other thin clients. And we saw others jump on the bandwagon. Like we got calls out of the blue from customers running HP OS and for Wise, the ones we hadn't heard about in years. And they've actually sent these thin devices home to support that use case. And now they're requesting likewise a purpose-built user experience agent for those usually Linux-based devices to be able to see that first mile of connectivity. Because if you don't see that and you're only seeing the Citrix session upstream, you're not measuring the full user experience composite metrics, right?
Yep. Yeah. And that's great. You mentioned that. See, I didn't even realize that. I mean, that's awesome. That's something that's been an ask from customers now. But especially I've been doing a lot of work with call centers recently. And that's one of the things when they all went work from home, is like they're reporting, Citrix sucks, right? And it's like, well, it's not Citrix. Let's dig into this, right? And then you get in there and you see, high RTT times and all this stuff, but you're still missing that like you said, that what you're calling the first mile, right, is really just that actually at home connection. So being able to get the Wi-Fi metrics and seeing that, and are you actually getting not just Wi-Fi metrics, but also like endpoint metrics like CPU,
we're looking
memory,
at RAM, CPU, and the utilization of that. So
because to Rich's point, the optimization engines, that's like with the UCC stuff that you're seeing with Zoom and Teams and the offload engines with Jabber, and that's all using endpoint, right? So if they have older endpoints that they repurpose, now that's going to be hitting, and if you don't see that utilization, that's really what's driving the experience.
We'll help categorize them too. We'll look at the users and how they're using their existing PCs today. If you're about to transition to that, and we'll make a recommendation for repurposing for something like to use Stratodesk to repurpose a lot of PCs to a thin OS device. And we'll categorize those. We'll say these type are more or less your task workers, and these are using the machines more intensively, whether it's for collaboration or for things that are graphics intensive. So because you can repurpose just about any machine to a Stratodesk device, right, Rich?
Yep.
But should you and how should you recategorize those? And I think we had a question we're wanting to look at a little later, so I might be getting ahead of ourselves, but the same goes for Windows 11. So there's only about 50% of the PCs out there by estimates right now can run Windows 11. And it's not even that number. It's a little lower than that, but it's 50%. It's easy to remember. It's close enough. But what if you started to perform Windows 11 operating systems for your users in the cloud instead on Microsoft AVD or Citrix, right? Citrix using your AVD entitlements. And in that way, you can repurpose all your machines to something like Stratodesk or something else and take advantage. And the chip shortage Rich brought up is real. So you've got the chip shortage against you, and you've got new requirements for Windows 11 that are, I say they're coming because nobody's adopting Windows 11 anytime soon. I don't think. Maybe second half of next year.
Rich is already running it.
I jumped in.
Early adopter.
I did, but it rolled itself back on my machine.
Yeah.
Well,
did you keep the start menu in the center, or you moved it back?
No, it's still in the center. But I mean, quite honestly, the reason I jumped in, guys, is I actually have a Surface Pro 3 laptop. So I figured, if there's going to be a Windows 11 compatibility, it's got to be on this machine, right? So.
Well, Shane, we have a great use case with you all over at Choice at Kansas University Medical Center, where when they started the work from home, it went, the number of Citrix licenses grew by the thousands, right? And the biggest difficulty we had to work with the IT department on was, how do I tell very quickly at a glance whether the home office is the issue or whether it's something somewhere upstream into the data center, et cetera, and they would use our technology with the Kansas team and be able to literally send snapshots and screenshots to the clinicians, physicians, healthcare workers, and say, look, based on the data we have, it's got to be your home office. And then they start, going down the checklist of, people that have, kids at home playing Xbox and doing things like that, or simply you're too far away from your home router, or you need to upgrade your service.
Yeah, you're still running that Netgear Linksys Wi-Fi from 7 years ago.
Yeah,
but that actually brings up a great point and transitions to a good question that came in from John. And he says, it's great to be armed with all that data, right? You got all this great data about performance and analytics from the endpoint and the back end, et cetera. But how has everyone, approached messaging? That the certain issue is now like at the user's endpoint. You have data that proves that it's at the endpoint. How do you approach that messaging? Because in the point of weak Wi-Fi, causing retransmissions, poor session, et cetera. But it's there, YouTube and Netflix works fine.
Yeah.
Right?
Sometimes it's that, and sometimes you got to tell them to come back inside from laying out next to the pool doing their work, right? Just get close to your Wi-Fi router. So you have to have those frank conversations, or you have to say, maybe we need to upgrade what you're doing. I just had a good friend of mine that started a job last week at a new cryptocurrency company that's well funded with VC money, and they gave him a whole kit, but he had to meet the minimum specs. It's a work from home job, so he could go buy what he wanted as long as it met the minimum spec. So there's those conversations that are happening now that we've had a big work from anywhere push.
Yeah, and I'm curious, because we don't see that aspect that often of it, because usually when somebody says something to me about, hey, it's working for this group of users, but we've got one user that it doesn't work very well for, I say, well, we have partners like Liquidware, you need to go talk to those guys about, they'll be able to tell you where that aspect of it is, because
they'll tell you to come in from outside at the pool. Yeah.
If you've got 9,000 people that it's working great for, but 3 that it's not, either they got user habit problems or they've got equipment failures. But, it's one of those things. I think, it's given us the opportunity as home people, right, taking it out of the work for a moment, to go back and look at our internal or our personal infrastructures. You mentioned it a moment ago, Shane. I mean, how many people out there haven't updated their router, or haven't bought new routers, those kinds of things, just in years, and they don't think about it. They just completely oblivious. They just, I turn on my iPad or my Netflix and it just works and I don't care, and then, somebody like one of us gets on the phone with them and goes, by the way, we're seeing a lot of retransmits, or we're seeing a lot of collisions, or we're seeing a lot of data loss. And by the way, you may want to go check, can I help you log into your Linksys? And we help them when we log into their Linksys and find out, they haven't done a firmware update in 6 years.
Yeah. No, it's a great point, and it makes you think. And I've seen some startups around this area, right, to help kind of handle logistics around helping to set up that home office, right? So now the companies are saving money from sending people home, right? They're not coming in the office, they're not doing all the different stuff that they do in the budget associated with that. They should transition that budget towards upgrading the house, right? In the sense of, home Wi-Fi, making sure that that router has QoS and those things built in, kind of automated setup, so where they can ensure that the protocols for modem are optimized over Netflix. And so they should transition some of that budget, right, and towards the house. And how do they have the right webcam set up? Mine's kind of Mickey Mouse. I'm still using it. I just dusted it off before this, but that's an interesting aspect as well, how companies will shift that money around. So we did have a question come in, so curious your thoughts, and then I had a question as well around cloud optimization and cost optimization. So we'll take a look at this question here from the audience that said, regarding remote and kind of hybrid work in the cloud, right? So do you think the pace of digital disruption since early 2020 will continue into 2022 and 2023? If so, what changes do you think folks should be aware of? This one's for 500.
I think going back to the optimizations, from my perspective, again, I don't care where the VDI or where the solution is, as long as we can get there, we can provide the desktop. But from a vendor perspective, what I'm seeing is, as I mentioned earlier, we had the VDI solutions or the solutions in the data center and in the network, and it was all great. But now we had the capacity to be able to support 3,000 versus 30,000. And so the ability to take that load and move it into the cloud so I can have the flexibility to expand it, reduce it, or geolocate it, right? Maybe, personally, I'm seeing there's a lot of call centers that have moved to the Philippines. So do you have to move those workloads from one geo to another, those kinds of things. So I think that's where the cloud offerings are going to be more beneficial from my side of it.
Yeah. I think the trend is going to continue.
I agree.
And what we're seeing, especially with the move to Citrix to Azure and solutions like that, is that you're also looking at solutions like AVD. You don't want to undersize, and you sure don't want to oversize, because you're going to be leaving and spending a lot more money than you should have. So I was going to say leaving money on the table. But we've got new reports that we've built out for recommendations when we do an assessment for an organization looking to move. And we make some cloud recommendations based on the real world usage, and these are out of Stratosphere. So we can recommend Azure instances from the get-go, and we'll specifically name off the Azure instance that this group of users should be into to maximize your ROI, or you get the best total cost of ownership out of that too. And then, but we recommend you wait about 3 to 6 months and you run that as an audit again, because those things may change. Those users may start using those desktops differently, and you audit again. So you audit at least every 6 months, make sure that you're on the right Azure instance, and then you don't oversized or undersized. Undersized, you're going to suffer with poor user experience. Obviously, if you're oversized, you're going to be spending way too much for your desktops.
Yeah, and to your point, and talking about AVD, and really it's the Windows 10 entitlement, right, and the ability to do multi-session on Azure, right? Citrix extends that, extends AVD immensely, right, with the auto scale capability, session recording, all these great things. Session, but the main thing is, like, now you have Windows 10 with multi-session, right? So these people have gone one-to-one desktops. That's what they're used to. Pooled. They want to go and start with a hybrid resource location, get an Azure landing zone set up, and now they say, well, now you can actually do multiple to one, right? So what does that look like? And to your point, it's hard to do that sizing off the gate, right? So that's actually something I asked for, and I haven't followed up with you guys. That's great to know that's there now. So are you guys taking into account the multi-session aspect of it and saying, okay, we recommend just a D series or an F series, maybe it's more CPU heavy versus E, which is RAM heavy, for instance?
We worked closely with, I don't know if you know Mark Wolfson on the AVD team, one of the what they deemed a black belt. Now they've renamed him, but he helped us build that report out for a handful of customers. It's gotten better over time. So it's built as an assessment report, but we're using it as an audit report too after the fact to make sure you're on the right level.
Yeah, and I think because it's funny, because I had this conversation with a couple of people, customers recently actually, and it's really around, they want to jump right in and start reserving instances, right? And you got to have a couple, like you just said, a couple months of that data where you're pay as you go to really understand what that utilization is constantly. You're resize. The nice thing about the cloud is that you can resize on demand, right? You can resize the instances before you make that commitment to reserved instances. But it's also just around, work styles, right? And shift work, right? And how often that they're connecting into the environment, and being able to see that data in those shifts and actually call that out and say, hey, this is the what we're seeing for the work style. You have your call center, you have shift work like this. So we recommend that you should set your auto scale settings to this. Like that, that's gold, right? If you guys, Liquidware also, Thomas and Goliath start to look at that information, because people want to know how to tune. You got this great auto scale capability by Citrix. How do you tune that? You're doing vertical or horizontal load balancing. What makes sense? And then, that to me is really great to see that you guys are doing that, because it's super flexible, but it costs. It's not cheap, and so it's important to know and have those reports. So yeah, I think that answers the question, and kind of got into some of the cost optimization, which is exactly what I was curious about. You talked about instance sizing, but are you guys also looking at taking the performance data from the current workload, whether that's on premises or running currently in Azure, and then modeling that across, say, Google, AWS, or GC, and saying, hey, it's actually cheaper to run this workload over here, and here's what you could potentially save. Now, with that said, like with Citrix, your apps the number one rule: apps and data got to be next to each other. Just because it's cheaper to run over here, you're not going to move your entire infrastructure, right? It's got to make sense. But do you guys do any kind of modeling across the clouds today? Is that something or is something you guys are looking at? Or
we encourage you to run proof of concepts and pilots. Look at real world data on that. So we don't model, but we'll look at it, and baseline it. So we'll baseline not only the current user experience in the legacy environment, so you can prove out it's better, but then if you want to compare cloud against cloud, you can do that. So we don't do the modeling, but we encourage the baselining for sure.
So we have a new product, Shane, that's the Goliath Multi-Cloud Monitor that will bring in all the clouds, a SaaS-based, brand new product, SaaS-based, built on AWS, and it'll monitor AWS Workspaces, EC2, Azure, AVD, as well as Google Compute, all from the same console. So you can also see performance across multiple clouds. So it's very, very easy to compare all from the same dashboard. And then in the future, we'll add sort of costing comparisons as well. So bringing it all together, we just have a tremendous amount of demand for multiple clouds. I would have thought that the hybrid would be one particular public cloud and then whatever you have on premises. But what we're finding again is multiple cloud options. And I think people, when you talk about digital disruption, we're finding that people are really evaluating multiple different options. And I think that it'll be even more hybrid than maybe we initially anticipated, or at least I did.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. I think it's the more flexible you can make your. And I think the outages, a lot of these big cloud outages that have been happening over the last year, I think are driving some of that too, as folks don't want, even though you can have multi-region resiliency and availability zones and all these different things built in. Still, there's a potential that, hey, someone could, it was the BGP, or it's always DNS, right? But there was a DNS or Azure outage just recently. A bunch of folks went down, it was a change they had to roll back, but that has mass. I mean, you're literally sitting there with your thumb up your ass, right? I mean, there's not much you can potentially do unless you have resiliency in another cloud for some of those services. Maybe it's for DNS, for instance, right? If you're hosting DNS, maybe take pieces of those services and make them resilient with Route 53, for instance, right? And so that's just some of the stuff that we're seeing as well, and people kind of slowly stepping into that. But step one is understanding your existing workloads and performance of those, and determining what can or can't move across those different clouds. And I think, Jason, on your side, it's you guys actually enable portability. Right. So if you're dealing with, your profile container, for instance, and you need to move that user persona across each of the clouds, you have the ability to do that pretty easily, right?
We do. And so we'll, FS Logics is great. Our profile disk is great too. FS Logics being from Microsoft, but the thing that we have is a profile disk, but they can't go across OS. They're locked to an OS. But if you want to make that work where it's a seamless user experience, as Thomas said, we're seeing more and more hybrid environments, and that goes for the OS as well. Some customers are still on Windows 7 and they're paying that tax for staying on there for whatever reason for the next year or so, probably. There was a 3-year window there, I think, that they could pay. But and then we've got other customers looking at Windows 11 already. And then there's the server versions of that. And if you want a seamless experience to go from one to the next, we have a portability feature that you can have those FS Logix containers on each of those machines, but then allow our portability to go in there and do delta differences for the OS changes in there, and the user doesn't know the difference as far as the profile goes. Of course, the OS looks a little different, but their spell checkers and all the things that they set in those environments, including their Outlook signature, they're already in there and they're off and running every time they hit any of those machines.
No, that's pretty slick, and I think that's important to have that persona to be portable. For sure, when you're talking about moving across, from on premises, and I think what we're seeing too is the burstability. People, not everyone's going all in. We do have a lot of customers last year that were born in Azure, right? They had new use cases, I just got off with a big insurance company we did a design for instance. They have some developers and some SaaS-based use cases that they want to start extending out. So Citrix provides that ability to have multiple resource locations onto that single management plane, right? So have that Azure resource locations, shift those workers out there, those SaaS applications, and then eventually, maybe they just run out there fully, or maybe you currently use GPU on premises, and instead of buying new hardware, maybe you just used the N series, for instance, within Azure for GPU, right, for when you actually need it. So it's pretty cool to have that flexibility. So. Man, time flies. Holy crap. It's almost, we're just talking about all kinds of fun stuff here. So
just getting started.
I know, man, we're just kind of just starting to unpack things here, but, I guess I always like to ask, a couple questions around just in general, like for the audience, right? Everyone's got different takes on stuff. I guess first one, do you have, if you could, what tool, with the fast pace of innovation that's happening across all products, everyone's in fast release cadences. How are you all keeping up with the market? How are you keeping up with the up to date on the technology? And for you, in your jobs, obviously everyone has different roles here, but I think I'm just curious because that's something that everyone's always struggling with, myself included. Everything's changing constantly across all the stacks, right?
So I think from our perspective, it's a challenge, right? Because we support so many different protocols and so many different VDIs, and then then you throw all the hardware compatibility into it. I mean, the good thing is we have the ability to integrate those new updates, those features, those security features, and we don't force those updates on anybody. We give the administrators the ability to choose. You may have a group of users that are using Citrix and they've got to have the latest version of Workspace app because they're connecting to the cloud. You may have a group of users that are connecting to, a storefront that's, got a line of business application that hasn't changed. So we provide the flexibility to be able to choose which version of Workspace app if you want based on work group, groups or groups of users. We also have the ability to include those updates for, whether there's a change for AVD if somebody needs to do, So the nice thing is for us, we can provide those access, I guess, if you will, right? You just reach out with No Touch Center, give them a different connection, give them a different target URL. We can change the application's perspective from the user's perspective. Change the target, and a lot of times the user doesn't even know. I mean, I can literally reach down to a group of users, an entire fleet of machines, and say, look, instead of connecting to the Netscaler URL on-prem, we're suddenly going to move you to a cloud instance, and you'll never know the difference. They click on their application that they've always clicked on, and they log in, and everything seems to be the same. That's the nice thing from our perspective.
Sure.
I like not having to deal with the server side of delivery. That's
no, that makes sense, right? It's easy for you to keep up in that perspective. So I guess we'll kind of close it out. Some final thoughts there, I guess, Jason and Thomas, specifically around, like I said, either keeping up with your skills, a piece of advice for the audience. Number one thing you want them to. Do you think there's a value add that someone could take advantage of right now? Whatever you want to do, kind of closing thoughts. And
I'll tie it back to what you said. I personally, so I'm in charge of alliances now and product marketing management, and in both of those roles, you might be a step removed from the customer. So I try to get on as many customer calls as I can. So I'm not learning about the challenge of this customer, but I know about the challenge of this customer. And some run Citrix and some run the other solutions out there. So I get to hear it. All the challenges have common themes to them, whether it's cloud, moving to a cloud, or moving across OS or things like that. They fall within those areas. So I try to get on as many customer calls as I can, and then we circle back around when we're doing our use cases and case studies. I want to learn exactly how the customer, what they purchased and what they have been trying to solve, whether it's in a Citrix environment or anything else. Check back in with them and see the success from A to Z. What are the real benefits? So that helps keep me up to date to a degree. And I still try to run a little lab here for our own solutions so I can demo them myself. And so in the role I'm in, I'm not in the same role as even our listeners who have to be even far more technical than me. I'm at a higher level, like looking at things from a higher level. I'm not in the nuts and bolts, and that's where I'll stop. And Shane knows that about me. We've been to dinner and he gets so deep with me, and that's like, what's for dessert? Change the subject to a degree. But
when's that lava cake coming?
Yeah. But that's how I stay in touch as much as I can.
Yeah, we look outside of the building to try to stay ahead of things. We talk to our partners, we talk to our clients, and then we talk to analysts and look at the marketplace, and you try to triangulate between the three and especially with clients, right? You talk to somebody at the admin level or the IT level, you're going to get a different response than what the architect who knows what's coming down the pike in the next year or 2 years, because they're involved in those conversations, versus the CIO who's got a 36 to 48 months vision. So it's about having, I think, the right processes to be able to ingest that information from those different constituencies and then try to make sense of it all,
Yeah. I would say that the audience can stay in touch by attending these CUGC events. That's
100%. Yeah, no, that's exactly it, man. That was the lead-in question. You got it for 500 points, Mr. Jason Smith.
Nice plug, Jason.
No, that's great. No, I totally agree. And CUGC is incredible content. Also, techzone.citrix.com. Check it out. But yeah, no, I appreciate everyone coming. Actually, so it was funny. Paul actually posted a comment, just amazing what gets prioritized from a remote environment. So when you have family that share Wi-Fi and broadband with users, you risk the occasional hangups and downtime, right? I know when my wife, when Netflix doesn't work, that's a P1. So that's I get it, man. I totally got you, man. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. Thank you, Rich and Thomas, Jason, and Stephanie. Any closing thoughts? Last words?
Sorry, I was on mute.
No worries.
I just want to thank everyone again. It was a great conversation. I think it's so fun when we can pull everybody together like this and just, have an unscripted conversation and have you guys weigh in. It's to me, it's fun.
Yeah, it was awesome.
I appreciate it.
Cool.
So I put a link in the chat. It's to our current events calendar. We got, lots of stuff going on. Jason, who's below me, I think, Jason.
Yeah.
Jason will be back with us next week in a webinar. So check that out. And then we also have our Big West XL is coming up. That's one of those big day-long events. Lots of great content. So hopefully, and actually it'll be on the same platform. So you'll already be used to it. But thanks again, everybody. It was really great to have you all today. And thank you to Rich, Thomas, Jason for weighing in on all this stuff. And thank you to Shane for doing it all.
Yeah, it's awesome. I enjoyed it. So
thank you. It's great to see you all.
Everybody.
Nice seeing you. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Enjoy the weekend. All right, bye.